Words they've used about David's demeanor in that courtroom, they've described it as off, as sociopathic.
Inside the murder case.
Words they've used about David's demeanor in that courtroom, they've described it as off, as sociopathic. But you already know what I'm about to say. Just like I know, that the real story here isn't just about a singer who made a song called Romantic Homicide. It's about a system that let this happen. The body was found in the front trunk of his Tesla, dismembered, decomposed. The smell was so bad that tow yard workers couldn't ignore it.
Been abandoned, parked on the streets in the Hollywood Hills. Eventually, someone called it in and it was taken to a tow yard. There, workers started to notice a foul smell coming from the Tesla. Inside, LAPD officials would find a heavily decomposed and dismembered body. About a week later, the medical examiner identified the remains as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And we'll get into their alleged relationship shortly, because a lot came out at the prelim, but let's finish the timeline first. Now, it was odd. After a dismembered body was recovered in David's vehicle, and he wasn't arrested or charged, law enforcement publicly acknowledged that David was the prime suspect in the investigation into Celeste's death, but that was it. At least publicly. Behind the scenes, investigators were hard at work. In February 2026, a grand jury was called in Los Angeles County to review the evidence against David, and eventually, in April 2026, David was arrested. The LA County District Attorney filed multiple charges against him, including first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation. David was then taken into custody and has since been held without bail. Like I said, we've been
And look, you've probably heard about this case. The 21-year-old R&B sensation, the hit song, the fame. But what you haven't heard, what they don't want you to talk about, is the sheer horror of what came out in that preliminary hearing. I need you to stay with me here.
Course of 5 days in Los Angeles court. Now, the purpose of the prelim is to determine whether there is enough evidence to hold up at jury trial. And the burden of proof here in a prelim is much less than a regular trial. There, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a preliminary hearing, prosecutors only need to prove probable cause. Here's our reporter, Julia Day.
The threshold here in this preliminary hearing phase is much lower. The prosecution only needs to show probable cause. Think of that as kind of like a 51% threshold. But if this does go to trial, in order for a jury to convict, that's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Think of that as more like a 99.9% probability. So this is kind of like rehearsal for both sides. They're testing out their witnesses. They're seeing how they perform on the stand as humans being questioned, in front of a live audience under a lot of pressure. And we in the media, we're getting a sense of what questions might be asked during trial, how these witnesses are going to hold up, and how they might look and sound and feel.
Because this isn't just another celebrity crime story. This is about a 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and the fact that she was silenced, buried, covered up, and we all knew something was wrong from the very beginning. Let me walk you through this. It's September 8th, 2025, when workers at a tow yard in the Hollywood Hills notice a foul smell coming from a Tesla that had been abandoned for weeks. You can imagine the scene. The flies, the maggots that would later be described during the autopsy. And when LAPD officials open that front trunk, they find a heavily decomposed and dismembered body. Actually, wait. They don't just find a body. They find parts, limbs that had been severed from each other. And it takes a week to identify the remains as Celeste. She was only 14. And the person who owned that Tesla? David Anthony Burke. You know him as D4VD, the guy who sings about romantic homicide. Now here's where it gets interesting. And this is the part nobody talks about. The timeline is sickening. Prosecutors say David and Celeste started talking in 2021 when she was just 11 and he was 16 or 17.
Here's the Rivas Hernandez family attorney, Patrick Steinfeld.
David Anthony Burke has taken the position that Celeste said she was 18. He didn't know she was a child, but he knew because he was told in February of 2024 that Celeste was only 13 years old. This is a strict liability crime, meaning that if he's 18 and she's 13 and they're having sexual relations, that is automatically a crime. He does not have a defense. However, he had direct knowledge of Celeste's age and continued in their sexual relationship. So I find it abhorrent that the defense attorneys are trying to put any blame whatsoever on this young child.
And we're going to talk more about this during our interview with Sidebar host Jesse Weber, because that will definitely be an uphill battle for David. But first, let's go back to the revelations in the prelim. Now, prosecutors say David and Celeste started talking in 2021, when she would have been just 11 years old, and David would have been 16 or 17. Now, they met via social media apps like Instagram and Discord, and for a while, prosecutors say their relationship remained virtual. That is, until 2023. They met reportedly for the first time in November of that year, and then tried to make it more permanent around Valentine's Day 2024. Celeste's parents then reported her missing on February 15th, 2024, and first responders did a wellness check at David's home the same.
They met online, Instagram, Discord. It stayed virtual for a while. But then in November of 2023, they meet for the first time. And by Valentine's Day of 2020, they're talking about marriage. About having 2 kids. She's 13. He's 18. Her parents report her missing on February 15th. And when deputies do a wellness check at David's home, he stands there with a straight face, tells them he hasn't seen her in months, and shows them her yearbook photo, saying she told him she was 18.
Witness called was an LA County Sheriff's Department deputy who was called to David's home in the Hollywood Hills. Then 13-year-old Celeste out of Lake Elsinore, California, had been reported missing, and this deputy had to investigate.
So we heard from the senior deputy who actually went to the defendant's house up in the Hollywood Hills looking for this missing girl. Celeste would have been 13 at the time. We saw body camera footage of this senior deputy and his partner being let into that house by David, having a conversation with him, and then being shown photos on David's phone of Celeste. David said, yeah, he knew her. He met her online at the end of 2021, and he claimed to deputies that he hadn't seen her in months, but he pulled up her yearbook photo and said she told him.
He knew. You already know he knew. We all knew he knew. Because the text messages that came out in that courtroom paint a picture so damning it makes you sick. David was the one pushing Operation Awesome, their code name for her running away. He kept asking her, do you have your bags packed? He told her to bring everything you're going to use that I can't immediately replace. He called it the most important day of her life. Aside from their anticipated wedding. Again, she was 13. They had been having sex. And in January of 2024, she had an abortion.
Operation Awesome, where they were plotting her departure, her runaway from her home in Lake Elsinore. And this struck me too. David appears to be the one pushing this. He's the one who keeps on asking her, do you have your bags packed? He tells her, bring everything you're going to use that I can't immediately replace. Bring a bigger bag. Do you have everything packed? Are you ready to go? In one of these messages from that particular exchange, he calls that her runaway date, and I believe it was the day before Valentine's Day in 2024. He calls it the most important day of her life, aside from their anticipated wedding. Again, at this time, she is only 13 years old. This is just a couple weeks after memorialized in these.
The messages about that were shown in court. But here's the thing, though, and I need you to feel this with me. This wasn't just about sex. This wasn't just about a grown man preying on a child. This was about control, and about what happens when that control is threatened. The prosecution alleges that on April 23, 2025, Celeste threatened to expose their illegal relationship. She was going to ruin his career. She said she was going to tell her father lies about him. She said she was going to call his mother and tell her damaging information.
Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, She's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship, or perhaps early stages of dating, that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites as the source of her anger when she is threatening David and telling him over text the night before he sent the Uber to pick her up and deliver her to his home. She tells him over text that she's going to, quote, mutilate his penis. She tells him that she doesn't want to see one more instance of David being tagged in posts with Asia Collins. Asia did come out on the record and state publicly, after the charges were filed against David, that she never dated him. She also came out and says she wants justice for Celeste.
And here's the key. The prosecution alleges Celeste was threatening David, saying she was going to expose him for child sexual abuse, and that's why he allegedly killed her.
In those messages that were shown to the court, that Detective Farrell read to us, Celeste tells David that she's going to ruin his career. She tells him that she's going to tell her father lies about him. She tells him that she has contact information for his business associates and for his mother. She tells him that she's going to call his mother, Colleen Burke, and tell her damaging.
And look, she was just trying to be heard. She was just trying to be seen. And for that, they say he killed her. The autopsy photos were shown in court. Reporters actually stopped typing.
It was Tuesday, July 21st. For the first time, gruesome autopsy photos were shown in open court.
Today, for the first time, we actually, in the courtroom, saw photos of that portion of the investigation. We actually saw the victim's remains in cadaver bags, still in the front trunk of that Tesla. It was something I don't think I have the words to describe. Reporters sitting in the courtroom actually stopped typing for a moment. There was a second where it felt like everybody just froze. And there was this too. For the first time today, we actually saw the parents of the victim, the mother and father of Celeste. They were both sitting in the courtroom. They were sitting directly in front of me. They were about 3 rows ahead of me. And I could see the victim's mother, Mercedes, just bowing her head down and crying when those evidentiary photos were shown to the courtroom.
Have you ever had...
The victim's mother, Mercedes, bowed her head down and cried. And that's something I want you to really sit with for a moment. Because when they showed those photos, when they described the condition of her remains, the maggots, the decomposition, the limbs severed from each other, that young girl became human again. For the first time, she wasn't just a bag of decomposing body parts. She was a living human. A girl with red hair. A girl with David's name tattooed on her ring finger. A girl who was just trying to survive.
That shocking revelation was paired with a description of David and Celeste's relationship.
This is actually the first time during the course of this preliminary hearing where Celeste is being presented as a living human, a young girl who is very much alive, a young girl who has a voice, who is expressing her feelings, her wants, her needs. Before this, she was a bag of decomposing body parts. She was an autopsy subject. She was a collection of limbs that had been severed from each other. But this afternoon, she became human. Again, as we heard about these photos and saw some images that, of course, were not child sexual abuse material that could be shown to the court. We saw Celeste at age 13 with what appeared to be a diamond engagement ring on her left ring finger. That's the finger that had David's name tattooed on it in red ink. We saw photos of the two of them kissing and cuddling in bed. We saw selfies of the two of them. Celeste with her red hair in the front seat of his Tesla. What prosecutors are doing right now, I think, is painting a picture of the nature of their...
And you know what else they showed? A diamond engagement ring on her left ring finger. Photos of them kissing and cuddling in bed. Selfies of the two of them. Celeste sitting in the front seat of his Tesla. And when those details were described in court, David, the cold, emotionless man who had been staring straight ahead for days, started to fidget. His leg was jiggling up and down.
Before we move on to our interview with expert Jesse Weber, I have to talk about David's demeanor. A judge ruled he didn't have to be handcuffed, but he still needed to be shackled. And for the most part, he was pretty calm and emotionless in the courtroom, with a few notable exceptions, like this one.
When they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure a little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his dick pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked down at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down.
He was shrinking in his seat. He was losing his composure, because the truth was finally being exposed. But before I get to that, let me tell you about the evidence that really matters. The stuff that makes you realize how deep this goes. They found blood on the brick flooring underneath where the car was parked. And here's what nobody's talking about enough. Someone opened the front trunk with the remains inside and put multiple air fresheners in there to mask the smell.
The court heard harrowing testimony about the recovery of her remains in the Tesla.
We haven't heard about this detail before. According to this testimony from one of those two LAPD criminalists, there was actually blood identified in the brick flooring underneath where a car would have been parked. And that was underneath black rubber mats that were laid down on the garage floor in David's house. So what they seem to be painting a picture of here is blood leaking out of David's Tesla, seeping through those rubber floor mats, and then seeping down into that brick flooring. Hearing that, and sitting right behind the victim's parents, it was jarring. There is so much evidence in this case that has been unsettling in truly shocking ways that I don't think I've experienced before anywhere. But being, in that courtroom with the victim's parents, I think that drives home the point that this is about a human. This is about a teenager. This is about a girl who was killed and dismembered. This is about justice for her. So this isn't just about how Celeste was killed, how her body was then mutilated. This is also about the cover-up efforts. I mean, somebody must have noticed, oh, it smells terrible. We got to do something to cover that up. So somebody actually opened up the front trunk, reportedly with the remains inside, and then put air fresheners in there to try and mask the smell. Multiple air fresheners.
Think about that. Someone knew. Someone tried to cover it up. And then David's phone and Tesla were both recorded heading 95 miles northwest to Santa Barbara County. Same time, same day, same location. Right by Lake Kachuma off State Road 154. That's where Celeste's passport and personal items were later recovered. He was trying to create an alibi, texting Celeste's phone after she was already dead, asking, "Where are you?"
After David allegedly killed Celeste, prosecutors say he attempted to make a fake alibi, texting Celeste's phone asking, "Where are you at?" After that, David's phone and Tesla are both recorded heading 95 miles northwest to Santa Barbara County, the same place where Celeste's passport and personal items would later be recovered.
Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car, especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. According to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again, according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154.
Now I want to talk about something that'll make your blood boil. And this is the part that makes you question everything. There's a private investigator named Steve Fischer. He was hired by the property owner who rented out that Hollywood Hills home to David. Fischer collected neighborhood surveillance footage, digital evidence. He was a key player. But at the preliminary hearing, the deputy DA, Beth Silverman, had him excluded from the witness list. She claimed he violated grand jury secrecy, and she had a warrant issued for his arrest. But here's the thing. Here's what really happened. Fischer was sitting in the hallway, and Celeste's family attorney came up to him and thanked him for keeping the story in the news. That's it. That's all. But Silverman came storming down the hallway, physically grabbed the attorney, pulled him away, and said, "You are not allowed to talk to him. That is illegal." She made assumptions. She made accusations. And when the judge gave Fischer a chance to speak, he said he was actually approached by the family's attorney. He didn't even know who he was. And the judge, I got to say, the judge was super professional. But the whole thing stinks. It stinks of a prosecutor who doesn't want questions asked, who doesn't want the evidence examined too closely. And that, right there, is what happens when the system protects its own. I 100% believe in my heart and know in my heart he did this. And you know that too. But what I want you to think about, what I need you to think about, is why this case didn't move faster. Why was David allowed to walk around free for months? A dismembered body was found in his car. His car. The car that had been abandoned. The car that he drove. And he wasn't arrested until April of 2026, 8 months after the body was found. That's a lot of time. A lot of time for evidence to be buried. For the truth to be covered up. For a system that failed Celeste to fail her again.
Not surprised, because the bar for this case to move forward, whether there's sufficient probable cause to support the charges, is quite low. It's quite low. It's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Having said that, and this is something I do want to get into, there was a question for me whether the prosecution presented enough evidence at this stage to support first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations. If you ask me, when it comes to the charge of continuous sexual abuse of a minor, when you talk about the alleged photos and text messages that were found on David's device or purportedly found on his device, that's enough. When you talk about mutilation of human remains, the alleged purchase history, the forensic material, the Tesla, the alleged Santa Barbara trips, seemed to be enough for me there. When it came to first-degree murder, and by the way, I interviewed Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman last night on my News Nation show. The defense raised some interesting questions about, you don't have the murder weapon. The chainsaws that were tested negative for blood. How do you know exactly what happened in the house? There was no surveillance footage. The Uber driver can't definitively say where he dropped Celeste off. There was no text messages before or communication before, or at least presented during the preliminary hearing, that David intended to kill Celeste, that Celeste seemingly invited herself over, and that she wasn't lured. There was a question of also, this idea that Celeste threatened David. Was there a self-defense argument? Did she do something to herself? I'm not saying any of that's going to work, But there was a question, did they present enough of first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations of lying in wait and killing for financial gain and killing a witness, that I thought they were good arguments by the defense.
The defense has the audacity to ask if Celeste could have killed herself. The medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho, said he couldn't definitively say how she died because of the advanced state of decomposition. They can't identify the weapon. They tested chainsaws found in David's home, negative for blood.
Celeste killed herself, but it's certainly a line of questioning that I think any sharp defense attorney would explore.
The medical examiner can't definitively say what was used to dismember Celeste's body, so that part is still a question mark too. Chainsaws were recovered in David's home, so that did seem like a possibility, but per an LA criminologist and their testimony, that doesn't really seem likely.
And there was a lot of back and forth about the chainsaws. And here's why. Defense attorney Blair Burke noted there was no positive test indicating the possibility of blood on those chainsaws. So she kept on asking this LAPD witness for the prosecution why they didn't take those chainsaws into evidence. It sounded like she wanted to make the point that touch DNA, which they didn't test for, may have indicated something else, may have painted a more comprehensive picture of what exactly happened and who may have been involved, who else may have been involved, that is. But the criminalist was very sharp, very clear with her answers.
But here's the thing. They believe David purchased 3 chainsaws. 2 were found. Where's the third? That's the question nobody's answering. That's the question that matters. And the special circumstances here? Murder for financial gain. The witness testified that David raked in gross earnings of $10 to $11.5 million between 2023 and 2025.
A lot of the questioning there, a lot of the cross-examination from both prosecutors and defense attorneys had to do with management of David's finances. Who is paying the bills, who is reviewing expenses, and just how much money was involved in this operation around this budding artist with what's been described as a multi-million-dollar music career ahead of him. Well, let me give you the numbers this witness laid out. He says between 2023 and the end of 2025, David raked in gross earnings of $10 to $11.5 million. And he says that record label head made anywhere from $3.5 to $4 million off of just David. Now, why is this relevant? This goes back to that first-degree murder charge and the special circumstances around that charge. There are 3 of them. Those special circumstances mean this is eligible for the death penalty here in California, even though California technically halted executions back in 2019. So one of those 3 special circumstances include murder for financial gain.
His record label head made $3.5 to $4 million off of just David. And you know what's coming next. The death penalty. California has a moratorium on executions, but that doesn't matter. This case is death penalty eligible. And the DA, Nathan Hawkman, said he'd be open to a plea deal. But here's the problem. A plea deal means David gets to avoid the death penalty.
There's a question about where's that missing chainsaw? They claim that David purchased 3 chainsaws.
3.
2 of them that were found at the property tested negative for blood. Can you make the argument that the third one is what was used to dismember her body? Where is it? Is it in Santa Barbara anywhere? That's something I interviewed Steve Fischer about on Sidebar. So this is a rapidly investigated. I mean, they're continuing to get, I have to imagine they continue to get evidence in this case, and investigation's fluid. But those are the things that I wonder, are they going to have more from? And by the way, you and I both know the prosecutors, they were trying to subpoena David's family. For what purpose? What did they know about this alleged purported relationship? What can they say about the registration of the Tesla? What comments did David allegedly made to them, assuming there's no hearsay issue? So those are people that I think also may testify and may be part of the prosecution's case. But again, I don't think that they want to release more to the public than they have to at this point.
Right. I mean, there was so much evidence that was presented at the prelim that we didn't quite know yet, but I'm not surprised that they've got so much more in their back pocket, kind of ready for this to go to trial. And I'll be interested to hear who is called as witnesses, what sort of information is presented. All of that is going to be really intriguing. And I guess this kind of leads into my next question, the special circumstances of it all. Now, Hawkman has come on the record and said this is a death penalty eligible case. We don't know yet if we're going to seek that. The defense can put forth their argument, kind of paralleling the Nick Reiner situation to the special circumstances that enhance it. I know this is complicated because there is a moratorium in California. There hasn't been an execution in however many years. However, it's still something that LA County could pursue. So can you kind of talk a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. This is a weapon. This is an advantage for the prosecution to use. And even if you're on death row, your life is different than just being life in prison. The important part about this, and again, not to just self-promote, but I have to for this purpose.
You have to.
I interviewed Nathan Hawkman. I asked him, what we saw, I mean, we didn't see it. We were just reading the reporting on it. But these graphic photos of Celeste's body being dismembered, the allegedly graphic, sexually explicit photos and messages, you really want to put a jury through this? You really want a jury to see all of this about a 14-year-old girl? Do you want the family to go through this? Is there an avenue? Is there a path by which you would accept a plea deal in this case? Could you use the death penalty as a way for a bargaining chip? Like, David, we'll take the death penalty off the table if you plead guilty, right? He said to me, if David wants to come forward with the plea deal, we'd be open to that conversation. So I think that is something that is strategically being kept back. But also with any prosecution, the death penalty complicates a case because it takes longer, right? It's going to take longer to gather that evidence, present that evidence, different mental health experts, different mitigating factors. And also you have to get a jury that would be death penalty qualified. Easier said than done. It's one thing to get a jury who can decide whether someone is guilty or not guilty, but for them to be recommending death, it's not so simple. So this is a consideration they have to have. They talk about with the family. Do you want, we go with the death penalty, particularly when there's a moratorium on executions as of right now, it could elongate this case. It could take longer. Is that what you want? If we don't go that route, we can get to trial sooner. So I think that that's something they have to consider as well.
And Celeste, she doesn't get to live. She doesn't get to be 15. She doesn't get to be 16. She doesn't get to be anything. And look, I want to pause for a second here. I'm not going to lie to you. This one got to me. Maybe it's because I have kids. Maybe it's because I remember being a teenager and thinking the world was so big and scary, and I just wanted someone to protect me. And when I hear about a 13-year-old girl, a girl with red hair and a tattoo and a dream of marrying someone who was supposed to love her, who was dismembered and left to rot in a trunk, I can't stay neutral. I can't be objective. Because this isn't objective. This is about a child. This is about a child who deserved better. And the system, the police, the courts, the media, they all failed her. They all failed her. But here's what I want you to take away from this. And I'm going to speak to you directly here, just you and me. You and I both know that a young girl's life was taken because she threatened to expose the truth. She was silenced. She was literally silenced. And the person who did it? He's sitting in a courtroom with no handcuffs, no shackles, staring straight ahead like he's the victim. Like he's the one who's been wronged. And this is the world we live in. A world where a man can groom a child, rape a child, murder a child, dismember a child, and then have the audacity to act like he's just a misunderstood artist. You know it. I know it. We all know it. So here's my question for you. And I want you to really think about this before you answer. What are you going to do about it? Because silence is complicity. And we've all been silent for too long. The comments are open. I'm waiting.